I'm now the fourth United States president to preside over American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility onto a fifth. It's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. That was President Biden pushing forward with plans to withdraw all U.S. troops in Afghanistan after nearly 20 years. He plans to follow through on the Trump administration's deal with the Taliban to pull back American troops. The formal announcement came from the White House Treaty Room earlier. It is the same room President George W. Bush used to announce the U.S. would invade Afghanistan in October of 2001. Last year, the Trump White House agreed to remove all troops by May 1st. Mr. Biden's deadline is delayed. He is pledging to start to withdraw them this month and finish by September 11th. That is the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Here's how President Biden explained his decision.
We have service members who were not yet born when our nation was attacked on 9/11. War in Afghanistan was never meant to be a multi-generational undertaking. We were attacked. We went to war with clear goals. We achieved those objectives. Bin Laden is dead, and al-Qaeda is degraded in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's time to end the forever war.
After his speech, the president traveled to Section 60 of Arlington National Cemetery. It's where service members who died in Iraq and Afghanistan are buried. Mr. Biden says he carries a card in his pocket with the number of American troops killed in those wars. As of Wednesday afternoon, the U.S. death toll in Afghanistan is 2,488. While he was there, President Biden spoke of his late son, Beau. He was an Iraq War veteran.
I have trouble these days ever showing up at a veteran cemetery and not thinking of my son, Beau, who proudly insisted on putting on that uniform and going with his unit to Iraq and giving up his spot as Attorney General in the state of Delaware because he thought it was the right thing to do. And look at them all.
CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins me now. Major, you and I both covered George W. Bush's presidency, and we heard President Biden say that he spoke with former President Bush Monday about the decision. When we look at it now, nearly 2 decades later, what is the legacy of America's war in Afghanistan?
Well, Elaine, as I prepared to answer that question, I'm just going back through my notes. Many milestones in my professional career in Washington have been defined by 9/11. I was with George W. Bush in Sarasota that fateful, horrific morning when the atrocities came before our very eyes. That's September 11th. I was covering his address when he announced the United States forces would go to Afghanistan. I was in West Point with President Obama in 2009 when he added an additional 30,000 U.S. forces to surge in Afghanistan. I was with President Trump at Fort Myer in August of 2017 when he said, you know, my inclination was to pull us out of Afghanistan, but I've been talked out of it. I'm going to keep a residual force in Afghanistan. And now here we are today with what is essentially a binding agreement put together by the Trump administration that limits the options of President Biden. And the force that we have there now, about 2,500, is not by any stretch of the imagination, and not certainly a strategic, war-fighting force. It is a residual force of special operators and others who keep an eye on the Taliban but don't actively fight a war in Afghanistan. And President Biden said by September 11th, 20th anniversary, we're going to leave. And the legacy, I think, is in 2 parts. The first part, the Bush-initiated mission in Afghanistan, to rout al-Qaeda, chase it out of Afghanistan, rout the Taliban, and push them into Pakistan, largely successful. It took many, many years to get Osama bin Laden, but that strategic goal was accomplished. Then it morphed into nation building, and that has been a slog and a frustrating and costly one for U.S. military personnel and U.S. Treasury in Afghanistan ever since. And as the president said today, every president before him waited for the conditions to be absolutely right to announce a withdrawal. He is determined that day will never come. And if you wait for absolutely right, you'll be there forever. So you have to leave when you can, leave when you think that the initiative, if not is with the United States and coalition forces, at least is at some form of stasis where there is some chance for the Afghans and the Taliban to reach a different future. That is an optimistic appraisal. There are many who fear that this will lead to, not immediately, but over the many months ahead, civil discord in Afghanistan, moving into civil war, a toppling of the government, and a reemergence as a governing authority, the Taliban, and all the negative consequences that come with it.
In fact, this decision to withdraw is facing heavy criticism, as you know, from Republican lawmakers. Let's listen to South Carolina's Lindsey Graham this afternoon.
I want the American people to know when it comes to Afghanistan, there are no great options. This is a place that's complicated and dangerous without a lot of great options. But the options are high risk, medium risk, and low risk to the American homeland. President Biden, unfortunately, has chosen the highest risk option available, which is to leave no matter what.
So, Major, how is the Biden administration approaching this sort of criticism, and how does the fact that this was a Trump administration deal factor into this?
Well, that's a big part of this, Elaine, and I'm glad you mentioned that because Senator Graham wasn't a big fan of the drawdown by the Trump administration to 2,500. He knows that is not a war-fighting capability in Afghanistan. There hasn't been a U.S. casualty in Afghanistan, according to the records I reviewed before coming on the air, since November of last year. Most of the casualties are both civilian, Afghan police, and Afghan military. They're the ones fighting and engaging the Taliban. So if Senator Graham doesn't want 2,500, what number does he want? And the Biden administration is saying there is no number large enough because during the Obama presidency, we had a far larger military footprint there, and none of the things that we are now facing were resolved. The Taliban was still attacking, the Afghan government was still riddled with corruption, and the country sort of just continued to move on in the current way. Nothing has changed in 10 years, despite a tremendous amount of investment in blood and treasure. So the Biden administration defends this by saying, not only is it time to leave, but the threat matrix in Afghanistan is not what it was 20 years ago, when the United States did not have its eye on the Taliban and al-Qaeda and the risks that it presented. It now has its eye on other places where aligned extremist groups are existing and pose a threat. Parts of Africa, the Middle East, even some parts of Asia, where either clients of al-Qaeda or similarly inspired extremist groups want to do violence to the United States. The Biden administration says Afghanistan is not the only theater in which asymmetric warfare can come to the United States. We need to take our eyes elsewhere, pull our troops out of there, and not be bogged down there any longer. But if Afghanistan falls apart and something ruinous happens or semi-ruinous happens, it will be on President Biden's watch. He knows that. He knows these risks as well as anyone, having traveled there as much as any other senator other than John McCain or possibly Lindsey Graham. He knows the risks. But he also knows that for his presidency and whatever strategic confrontations may come with China or Russia, Afghanistan can no longer be something that he believes hobbles us more than helps us.
You talked about the threat matrix in other parts of the world. The war in Afghanistan was a key piece of what became known as the U.S. war on terror. So what does that look like in 2021 and going forward?
Well, lots of people are much smarter about this than I am, but the general consensus is the Taliban is a problem, and al-Qaeda could be a problem if the Taliban re-engage and the al-Qaeda marries up with it again and basically has a safe base of operation in Afghanistan. No one in the U.S. military believes that's going to happen, A, because we have eyes and ears on the ground, and we'll have some intelligence about that. Drones are much more effective, and other means of asymmetric warfare conducted by this country could suppress any particular threat there. But there is ISIS still, remnants of it in Syria and Iraq. There's ISIS-inspired groups all throughout the Middle East. There's al-Shabaab in Africa, as the president indicated. And there are other groups that think along those lines or want to see if they can foment extremism in Asia. But look, the president is also worried about Russia, which is massing troops and moving some ammunition toward Ukraine right now as we speak. There are theories that China wants to do something confrontational possibly in the next year in regards to the future of Taiwan. Those are significant strategic challenges to this administration. They would be to any administration. And quite clearly, the Biden administration wants to prioritize de-escalate in Afghanistan, reprioritize elsewhere, both conventional and asymmetric.
Major Garrett, we're grateful for your analysis and reporting on this day. Thank you. For more on the day's political news, I want to bring in Eugene Scott and Ella Nilsen. Eugene is a political reporter for The Washington Post, and Ella is a White House reporter for Vox. Welcome to you both. Eugene, let me start with you. Since the president's announcement this afternoon, CBS News learned the White House is creating a new senior-level liaison position for the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. This after heavy criticism for lack of cabinet representation. Remind us how we got to this point, Eugene.
Well, as you know, Elaine, Asian Americans are the fastest growing demographic group in America, but they did not have the representation that they desired in the cabinet following the plan of the White House to have Neera Tanden receive a cabinet position, which she resigned from after it became clear that she would not get the support she needed from the U.S. Senate. And so you had two Asian American women in the Senate make it very clear to the White House that if the president and his team did not put forward a liaison to the Asian American community in light of everything that is happening regarding hate crimes, that they would stop backing the president's efforts to get people in their cabinet. And as you know, the Senate is really tight, and the Democrats, the White House, cannot afford to lose any votes. And so Biden made it very clear that supporting the Asian American community, a demographic that actually played a sizable role in his victories, especially in states even like Georgia, that he really wanted to have someone on staff with history and knowledge about the issues impacting Asian Americans most, and that he was going to do that. And that is how we got here.
All right. Well, Ella, while President Biden spent the day focused on the Afghanistan withdrawal, Vice President Harris held a roundtable on migration from Central America to the U.S. She's planning to visit Guatemala and Mexico. What do we know about how the VP's role is shaping up regarding the migrant surge at the border?
Absolutely. I mean, this meeting today was a sign that Vice President Harris is stepping up in this role, which she's been discharged to by the president. And she said today that she is going to be taking a visit to Mexico and Guatemala, although she did not specify exactly when that is going to be happening. But she and the Biden administration writ large have still a significant challenge ahead of them, as we're still seeing a number of migrants and especially unaccompanied minors significantly coming to the border, and still having things like Title 42 in place, which are the pandemic restrictions. Keeping many of these migrants out. And there are just a number of challenges that Vice President Harris talked about today, kind of these large underlying challenges with continuous economic instability in these countries, in these Central American countries, and after effects from hurricanes and natural disasters that displace people and are pushing, a wave of migration north, adding to, people who want to come to the U.S. after years of the Trump administration keeping people out. So there are just a number of very big challenges ahead for the vice president and for the Biden administration overall.
Meantime, Eugene, on Capitol Hill, we learned that a House panel is set to discuss a first-of-its-kind panel on reparations for slavery. What is the status of that bill, and what is expected to come of it?
Well, there's a House committee that wants to vote to form a commission that will study just how feasible reparations are. This is an idea that was first introduced in 1989 by the late Congressman John Conyers, but just hasn't been able to get any traction since then because of the demographics of the House and just what was happening culturally. It'll be incredibly difficult, as you can imagine, getting support for reparations, even studying a commission on it from moderate Democrats following the 2020 election, where so many believe that Dems lost some seats because of ideas like defund the police and other progressive policies that were just too far left for so many voters. And obviously, this is getting almost no support, if any at all, from Republicans. But the reason why this will continue to be a topic of conversation is because when people talk about systemic racism and income inequality, two topics that were very common and popular during the 2020 election and continue to be so, there are many people who believe that you cannot have that conversation without talking about the racial wealth gap and when it began, and it began during slavery in this country.
Finally, Eugene, I also want to ask you about your latest analysis for the Washington Post. It's headlined, "Data about the Capitol rioters serves another blow to the white working class Trump supporter narrative." What did you learn?
Well, as you know, very often people were told that Trump won not re-election, but won election because of the support of white working class voters finally having a candidate that they could get behind because of the priorities and focuses of his platform. But there was always this idea from many people, especially Black people, that the support for Trump was actually far broader than white working class voters in rural America. And the study from the University of Chicago of the Capitol insurrection has supported that. The overwhelming majority of people that were arrested for rioting on January 6th were middle and upper middle class white people from urban areas, if not close suburbs to urban areas. And they were professional and very often college graduates who mainly were concerned more than anything else about cultural anxiety, that is, losing their status in America based on the increasing diversity that they were seeing happening in their communities, not economic anxiety that we were led to believe was a cause of many of the supporters who backed Trump in 2016 and 2020, but lived in places that were, had been decimated by policies that didn't benefit these communities. And so this was just another a piece of data, piece of information that reminded us that it really wasn't about policy and finances, but it was about culture in terms of people's ideas about what it was that actually made America great and their fears that Biden would move in another direction.
It's so important to have all of these data points, as I know people are trying to figure out ways to bridge these gaps in our country. Eugene Scott and Ella Nilsen, thank you both very much.